Well, joining me now to help us unpack just what is going on with Ontario's debt and spending is Ben Eisen, Senior Fellow with the Frasier Institute. Ben, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So this issue I'm obviously keenly interested in as a resident of Ontario, and also because I was, acutely interested in politics, especially during this time. So just to provide some context for our viewers, so at the time of 2018 election, the previous Wynne government was spending about $40 million a day, more than it was collecting in revenue. We had the largest sub-sovereign debt. Fill in the gaps for me here, just so our viewers understand.
Yeah, by the time, by the 2018 period, Ontario's fiscal circumstances were bad, for lack of a better or more descriptive word, and they've been getting progressively worse for a very long period of time, particularly since the recession of 2008, 2009. Ontario was perennially running multi-billion-dollar deficits every single year. Mm-hmm. There was no concerted effort to shrink the deficit quickly. The sort of governing philosophy was we'll try to slow down spending compared to how we were before the recession, and gradually the deficit will shrink over time. Well, that worked in that the deficit started to shrink a little, but all the while debt was piling up more and more and more because there was no effort to actually eliminate the deficit. So debt was piling up quickly, starting around 2008, 2009, all the way through to 2018, by which point Ontario's overall debt had grown, its debt relative to the size of the economy had grown, its debt relative to other provinces in Canada had grown. And in short, the fiscal situation in the province had gotten much, much worse. So that brings us to 2018, an election in which the Ford party then running for office, as you say, made a firm commitment. In fact, a central promise of their election campaign was to change course, to take a different approach to deficit and debt, and to fix essentially the problem that they inherited. Now, so that's where we were in 2018, facing a very serious fiscal situation, an election largely based on that fiscal situation, and a change in government.
So your report, or you wrote a report that suggests that the Doug Ford government has, in fact, made it worse, like that spending has actually gone farther. Just to rule this out with our viewers, and I said this in my intro, this is excluding COVID spending, am I right?
Yeah, it's non-COVID. The budget, for all of its shortcomings, the most recent budget, it does have some good accounting practices, including separating out the COVID, the one-time emergency COVID spending, as well as separating out emergency grants from the federal government to deal with COVID. So we're really able to make apples and apples comparisons over time, and the government does deserve credit for that transparency in their accounting in the budget. But when we look at it, we see something pretty clear, and it's the same thing we were starting to see before COVID emerged, which is despite wildly different rhetorical styles. Kathleen Wynne and Doug Ford, they don't talk the same way. They don't talk the same way about government. They're hard to mistake for one another at a glance. But in reality, their approach to fiscal governance has been very similar. Both of them had situations in which they faced undoubtedly difficult fiscal circumstances, real challenges that they had to address. But they took the same approach to addressing them, and it wasn't working, which was essentially to take a status quo approach to the budget, a status quo approach to spending, and to sort of hope that the deficit would gradually decline over time by itself. So what we show in our report is absolutely independent of COVID. Through the first several years in government, there's been much more continuity than there has been change. And that's always an interesting thing to look out for when there's a change in government.
Okay, I'm going to hold you there because I've got to cut to commercial break, and we'll be right back.